Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 17th Board of Education meeting. The board has already met in executive session and saluted the flag. I am not going to read the statement of public notice, but there are agendas at the front of the room. You're welcome to peruse that at your own pleasure. And we're going to start with item number 7, which is our student representative, Lucas Miller.
All right, thank you. So at Ridge, now that the student government has gotten started, each class has been starting their own projects. So the freshman class right now is working on designing their class sweatshirts. The sophomores are now selling phone sleeves that hold credit cards and other things on kids' phones. And the senior class is also working on designs for t-shirts and long sleeve shirts. And we also sold Camelback water bottles at back to school night a couple weeks ago. I forgot to mention that last week. So each class is kind of in fundraising mode right now. And in addition, this week is Violence Prevention Week. So we're working with the student assistance coordinators at Ridge to make students aware of that. And we're also going to be raising money to donate to charity at this week's football game.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Miller? None? All right. As always, you are welcome to stay, and you are also more than welcome to leave and do your homework.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. So I think we're going to go right now into a board presentation, which is the district testing report. For board members, I think there's a packet you should take with you.
And how about the other two presentations? Okay, good.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Heineman, Director of Curriculum Instruction here in Burns Township. And with me tonight for her very first, first Board of Education appearance, Ms. Tara Bowman. She's now officially done every single thing there is to do in Burns Township, so we've crossed that off the list. So we're here tonight to give you the district testing report. And I talked with the BOECC, the District Curriculum Committee, last week, and I said, it feels a little bit boring when I looked at the data that came back, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because data can be very exciting and interesting. But if I were to ask the audience tonight and say, we got back data that compares our students to the state average, how do you think we did? You could probably all make a very good guess. In fact, I'd imagine that everyone in this room would guess we probably beat the state average by a fair bit, which we've always done historically. And indeed, that is what has happened. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is that data regarding the Park 2016 administration. So NJASC had 3 performance levels, Park has 5 performance levels. What we're looking at for what we would consider passing the Park assessment would be a level 4 or a level 5, which is meeting grade level expectations or exceeding grade level expectations. New Jersey wants to remind us that this is the second year of the Park assessment, and we talk about comparing year-to-year results. I'll talk a little bit about some caveats with the data, but that this is the second year, so there are year-to-year results. Students in Burns Township took the ELA test in grades 3 through 11, and they took the mathematics assessment in grades 3 through 8, as well as the end-of-course assessment in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So now for the data, but as I mentioned, first some caveats. So student participation was limited, okay, in several grades, mainly at the secondary level, and so it is very difficult when you have half of a class taking an assessment to realize if that data is really meaningful or not, because we really can't figure out exactly what group of students may or may not have taken that assessment. The second is that we have some data points that are relatively small, right? If you're looking at a specific school on a grade level and you have 100 students and you have something that goes up or down 5 percentage points, well, you're really talking about 5 kids, and is that really a valid statistically significant measurement? It's tough to say. Also, the park test changed, right? So in 2015, we had 2 separate assessments, and they combined those scores together, and we had many more days of testing. In 2016, we had a single assessment in spring at the end of the year, so not quite apples to apples. Also, we know that students begin to have more homogeneous grouping starting in grade 7 in mathematics, when we have students go into algebra, then geometry, or algebra in grade 8, as well as starting in 9th grade for ELA, where they might take an honors course versus a non-honors course. And we don't really have those breakdowns either, so it's hard to determine where sometimes the scores come from at the secondary level. And last but not least, it's hard to see trends, right? So we essentially have 2 data points. And if you trust that even that they're both good, you now have a line. So that's good. When you're looking at data, a line is nice, but it would be nice to have a few more data points along that line to see if we have any trends, which of course we don't yet. So hopefully that's something for the future. So let's start looking at the data. This is the district's grade 3 through 11 ELA performance. So I'll draw your attention to the top. That's the state performance. This is the number of students who received a 4 or a 5, okay, on the park assessment. So the percentage of students overall. So that state number, of course, comes from every, if you took the 3rd grade, every 3rd grader in the state of New Jersey, about half of the 3rd graders in New Jersey met that level of performance that we'd consider passing. Whereas in Burns Township, it was approximately 72% of our 3rd graders met that 4 or 5 benchmark. So I won't read through every one, but if you do some quick math, you'll see it's around 25%. So in each grade level, we've been higher than the state average by about 25% consistently across those grades. Now you'll see it gets a little bit shaky at the high school, but once again, we're talking about, for instance, if you look at 10th grade, you're talking about half of our students at Ridge. And if you're looking at 11th grade, it's less than that and also does not include our AP students, right? Because the students who took AP, ELA in grade 11, were not required to sit for the park in grade 11. So the 3, 4, and 5 data is very solid, right? We know we have a good participation, so that's good data. The data at the secondary level at Ridge is a little more questionable. So it is, once again, as I said from the beginning, good performance, right? As we've expected and seen in the past on ELA from grade to grade. So in mathematics, actually a little bit better. So we were higher than the state average across the board by about 35%. So that, we never like to say, well, let's look at the state average. Like for years, I've been here 13 years, we've always been far ahead of the state average. And we used to look at district factor groups, right? They did away with district factor groups many years ago, and we now have peer schools, and they don't report that data. So if you're asking yourself, well, why is Brian showing us the state average, which we know we always beat? The reason is we do not receive data. There is no district factor group. We see a district comparison to state, and we see district comparisons to the park schools, which is actually a little bit lower than the state. So the best comparison we have in this case is the state data. So like I said, 35% across the board. And the math data is a little bit different because once you get to the high school level classes, right, and Park considers Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 to be high school level classes. Once you get to those, your grade is irrelevant, right? If you are an 8th grader taking algebra, you take the end of course test for algebra. If you're a 9th grader taking algebra, you take the end of course test for algebra. So when you see those scores, that is our district average from any kid, right, from any school that's taken that test. So you see, for instance, if we look at algebra, our students at William Annan, 97% passing, so quite successful. And then you say, well, boy, Ridge High, isn't that very low? But don't forget the way we lay out the algebra course here. The vast majority of our students have taken algebra, right, by the time they've left William Annan. And so it's a very small number of students you're dealing with. That 36% is a small portion of our population. Whereas across the state of New Jersey, that's not the case. All right, so once again, that's why I'm saying it's very tough to try to put apples to apples here and see if that's a meaningful number. And I think there's quite a few reasons why things like that might jump out at you are not necessarily meaningful statistics as far as the data goes. So here's our year-over-year report. And this one can get a little confusing, and don't worry, because it is combined in a future slide, 2 slides from now, so you'll see it all kind of put together. But what it's trying to do is look at, well, how did students in grade 3, for instance, do one year to the next in each of the 5 performance levels. And if you look, just quickly glance at the numbers, you see, very small differences, right? If you look down the level 1 category, 4 to 4, 2 to 1, 0 to 1, 2 to 1. So, 1, 2, 3 percentage point changes from year to year. So relatively small changes across each of these levels. So you'll see level 3 in here, and when the state reported out a combined score, they took out level 3. So NJ Ask, remember you were either one of 3 categories with only one being unsuccessful, and there's kind of this middle realm in Park that is, as far as they're concerned, not meeting the standards, but we tried to correlate this. What did this look like in NJS? Which kids were these, right, in NJS, these kids that are getting 3s on Park? And when we kind of looked at it and talked to our group about it, we think that these are the kids who, if you remember the old NJS, was around 200. They were right on that bubble of being successful or not. And we think the state kind of got that bubble of students and put them in this 3 category. And that seems to be what that number is, because at some point, when I'll show you the next slide, the state actually discounts that category and says 4s or 5s and 1s and 2s, and the 3s are in this kind of odd, nebulous middle realm that we have, they don't tell us a lot about. They are not successful as far as passing, but they are not in that 1 or 2 low expectation category. There are some larger changes as you get up in the upper grades, but don't forget we see, once again, the participation rates and things like that that make those numbers a bit sketchy. In mathematics, right, same thing. If you look down any of those categories from 2015 to 2016, in fact, across the board you have very similar numbers and very small changes from piece to piece. The good news is, if you look where are our largest numbers at, they're in those 4 and 5 categories, right? You see a lot of large numbers over there, although the changes aren't that big, 28 to 32, 19 to 20, 30 to 30. But most of our kids are existing over there in that 4 and 5 category. So what I did now is put those together and try to take a peek at how we did overall change in level 1 and 2 and our change in level 4 and 5. So in orange, you want the numbers to go down, right? So you want little down arrows. And in blue, you want the up arrows, because you want your 4s and 5s going up, and you want your 1s and 2s going down, right? So what's not in here? What number's not in here? 3. Number 3 is missing, right? So number 3 is, like I said, this was, New Jersey gives us guidance on how to share and present information, and this is one of the slides they kind of use as one of their things to share out to the public. And I thought it was interesting that 3 wasn't there, and that's what made us have further discussion about why 3 is not in here. So 4s and 5s you want going up, you want up arrows, and 1s and 2s you want the down arrows. So you see it's a bit of a mixed bag for us. We do have some of each going up and down, but all those numbers are small, right? They're all small numbers. We're talking about 2-3 percentage points. We're not talking about large percentages, kind of going back and forth in every direction until you get to some of those sketchier upper grades where the participation was a bit off. So it's hard to say if, for instance, that change in level 4 and 5, where grade 10 went down 12%, is that meaningful? When we know that was less than half the 10th grade class. We just don't know. So unfortunately, that's why I said this presentation is a little bit boring, because there's not a lot of actionable information. The good information we have at the lower grade levels is positive, right? We see a lot of positive results, 25, 35% of the state average. And then when we get to the upper grades where we have more diversity and less participation, we see numbers kind of all over the place, right? And it's hard to draw a bead over what exactly might be going on with curriculum or instruction that we might want to improve. So combined again with mathematics, this is a little better. We saw some more positive gains. You see a lot more up arrows, right? There's only 1 down arrow in our 4 and 5 in mathematics. That's in geometry. And a little bit mixed in levels 1 and 2, but overall very positive, okay? Still though, small numbers, right? We're talking about 1s, 2s, and 3s for the majority of these changes. So not a lot of change from one year to the next for us in Burns Township. So the last piece of this is our subgroup reporting. And the subgroups in New Jersey, you report out on any subgroup that you have that is 11 or greater, right? So if you have 11 or greater students taking any test in any of the identified subgroups in New Jersey, that's reportable data. So you'll see some of these will get blanked out along the way because it fell below a certain number. So what we see at the elementary level with our subgroups is that very similar to NJASC, females outperform the males in both math and ELA, and for the other subgroups, our Asian students had the highest performance in both ELA and mathematics, right? And once again, if you see participation down the side, very good numbers across the board for our lower grades. And so just to be clear, what the slide is showing you, if you take, for instance, grade 3, you have 360 students, right? Of the females of those students, 77% of the females of that group, even if you say split in half, say it's 180, 77% of them got a 4 or 5 on the Park assessment in grade 3. Okay, so that's what that slide is saying. Now, as we move to middle school, we see that the boys, we close the gap. You know, we start to mature a little bit, and we start to, although you see middle school boys, you think mature, it just maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to, I have an 8th grader, so that's maybe a little questionable, but we start to close the gap, right? We have males and females getting more parity, which is good. I think Siri was listening to our presentation too. So that's a good thing, right? There is a gap score. The state does look at how all of our subpopulations perform in relation to one another, right? So ideally, you want every subpopulation in your building having very similar scores, and that gap closing down from group to group. So we do indeed see that in ELA and math in grade 6 through 8. Even though the ethnic groups, even though that gap closes as well, although the Asian students are still the highest performing of the three groups. You see at the bottom there in grade 8 mathematics, right? Total students is only 73, because most of the students have taken algebra or geometry. It's not that there's only 73 8th graders, it's that there's 73 8th graders in math 8. And then 2 groups fell below the 11, so those numbers are not reportable. Okay. Now the very last bit, and I hate to end with this slide because it's kind of a whole lot to do about nothing, because these numbers are a bit all over the place, right? We had very limited participation, and you see, you go, oh, Algebra 1 was pretty good, but don't forget, that's 7th graders and 8th graders too in there. So that number is not quite, you know, you're not looking at secondary, just high school students. And Algebra 2, we see it's a little bit lower, right, 177, which doesn't account for everybody. You know, it is what it is. Now, when you look at ELA, we see something similar, right, 259, 208 in 10th grade, and then only 74 in 11th grade, okay, reportable scores. So that data, once again, it's tough to say anything's actionable in there. Although, Ms. Bowman will talk about soon that if our numbers go up, you know, it might be something where we could look at year over year our performance if we have consistent data. The good news is 3 through 8, it's pretty good. 9 through 11, not so much. So that is the data, and I will hand it over to Ms. Bowman to tell you more about park testing and some requirements coming up this year.
Requirements, yes. Hi. Hi, Nick. Okay, so these are the dates for all the schools that are out there and posted. It looks a lot. If you look at the span of the dates, like the elementary schools, April 18th to May 19th, but to keep in mind that within the dates this year, we have the April break, so they're going to be broken up. The only school that will go straight through without any interruption is the high school. All the other schools, including the middle school, will have the Good Friday break. We'll also have the April break. There'll be a couple of days here and there, depending on the school, that's making decisions on not to give the test, like the Monday after the break, thinking that might not be a great environment for kids to come in right after a week off and take a test. Same thing about the day before the holiday, so that has all been taken into consideration when we pick the dates for the testing. So there are going to be 2 significant changes this year moving forward with the testing. One big one is going to be the high school. Last year, the park test was given in 4 solid days, and it was strictly come in, take the park, go home if you're done, take a break, come back, and do another session of park. So there was no teaching going on. It was 4 days of just park testing. So moving forward to this year, it's going to be 6 days with just 1 session. The English has 3 sessions in the secondary level, and the math. The English session 1 and 2 are 110 minutes each, and session 3 is 90 minutes, and all 3 sessions of the math are 90 minutes. So they can fit this in a delayed opening schedule. So they're gonna have, kids will come in the morning to do the park tests, and then delayed opening, and the rest of the day will be a typical school day. Now at WAMS, because of what I just said, that's the same at WAMS. The English sessions 1 and 2 are both 110 minutes, and the third is 90 minutes. And the feedback, even though the test was different last year, it was just 1 day, just 1 time, instead of doing the 2 different times. The feedback was for the English, when we combine you can combine any sessions, you just can't mix them. So we did sessions 1 and 2 last year on the same day. And then the next day, the kids came in and did the 3rd session. So this year, we're changing it, where the kids are gonna, on the first day, just do session 1, which is 110 minutes. And then the next day, they will do sessions 2 and 3. That being The session 2 feedback is from the kids is a lot more text. It was a lot more draining, and so have it combined with the lesser day, and then also another good reason we were feeling that they'll be fresh, to take the more difficult session first thing in the morning instead of taking it after going through a whole session. So those are pretty much the differences in the testing this year from last year, and the rest of the schools, everything else is pretty much the same as last year. Which brings us to changes this year, which communicating the score report. Even though this was the second year in doing the park testing, we got the scores back very early this year. The schools did not get the individual student reports until the end of October. They didn't go out until right around Thanksgiving time last year. If you're a parent in the district, you already got the reports. They were mailed out on the 30th in this district. What we did is we shared what the reports look like, because they do look very different from what the teachers see, the way we see it on one side, and the way it looks like from the state reporting out the graphs and all the information. So we did expose the teachers for the first time what it looks like, what the parents see, aside from just the 722 or decide the score. I mean, as teachers, we can see where their weaknesses and strengths are, but it's different on a spreadsheet in our grade book than it does look like on the report. I do have copies of it. Do you want to hand them out? What's the product? Yeah? Okay. So they did get a letter with information, and then we shared a sample score report on both to see the parents to recognize the different levels. Again, since it's also different, like Mr. Heineman was saying, with just being proficient or advanced proficient or not proficient, the 3 levels going to 5 levels. And it's interesting because the score reports show the 5 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, then it dives down into a 1, 2, or 3 based on where their issues are. So just trying to get all of that on the same page where they see. And then the same thing that this will be shared with the secondary teachers at the department meetings in October. So that's just a copy of the letter and what was sent out to parents. So this part I was hoping I could just skip, but it is the graduation requirements. And since it comes from the state, it's very confusing to read. So I'm going to try to explain it without actually just reading the documentation. This will be posted, and there is a link to the website. But in August 2016, they updated the requirements. So it looks like a lot, but the nice thing for all of our seniors, juniors, and sophomores, they can do anything, ORs. There's all those ORs. So in order to prove to the state that they're proficient in ELA and they're proficient in math, they just need, and I'm using that word just need, to pass any of the English parks, or the SAT reading, or the acupuncture, or all the way down to, if all these they could not get to, then there's the portfolio assessment. So the students that we have sitting in the bridge right now, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, between the SAT and just passing any of the Park English or the Park Math, they are proving proficient to the state to get their graduation certificate. Now, the freshmen. The freshmen that are sitting in Ridge right now, they will be allowed to go to some of those ORs if they do in fact sit for the park that they are in the course. So if they are a freshman and they're sitting in English 9, they must take the English 9 park. And then if they're in English 10, they must take the English 10. If they're a freshman in geometry, they must take geometry. The good news is the passing is still the same. They need to just pass any of the math parks. So if they already passed Algebra Park, then they still have to, and they're going to now take geometry, let's say as a sophomore, they still have to take the park end of year geometry because they're sitting in the class. It will not affect the graduation requirement, but that is what's supposed to happen. And in the end, if they do those things and they have not passed, then they may go to the ORs and take any of the ORs. But they need to do those things prior to the ORs. Then, those 8th graders. Tell you, Mr. Stansel, the 8th graders, right? It's always 8th grade when the changes come. They must take part of everything that they're in the class for, the same thing. And it's not an any anymore. Any student from 8th grade down, in order for them to get a high school diploma, any of those students must pass Algebra 1 Park, and they must pass the ELA 10 Park, which means they're probably going to be taking an ELA 9 and take the Park and hopefully pass it. But they still do have to take ELA 10, and they must pass the ELA 10. And again, if they didn't, in order for them to go to the portfolio assessment, which there are no more ORs, if you see, those are all gone now. So 8th grade, it doesn't matter, when they're up in the high school, the SAT is not going to count for their graduation requirement proving proficiency. It's going to either be, they must pass that algebra and they must pass that ELA 10. If not, they still must take Park for all the courses that they're in, and then they may do their portfolio assessment to prove proficient. I hope that made sense. Thank you. Are we allowed to take questions? I see somebody raising your hand. I don't. Okay, we'll take questions at the end. Okay. Questions, that's not good. Well, this is really the end. So then, these are all the resources that parents, teachers, anybody has available to go and look. And the information that I shared with you is also, there's a link on here to go see it and maybe absorb all the ands and the ors a different way. Okay. Thank you. So now we're going to go questions, right?
So if the board, yes, the board has questions. We're going to pass around the mic
okay.
or mic? Microphone, you think?
Ooh, microphone.
So has the state issued any type of guidance for, like, if students don't pass the ELA 10, will they have a chance to take it again once we get to that point?
No.
You know, before going to the portfolio appeal?
No, right
They-
now,
There's no guidance.
There's no guidance.
Okay.
So the assumption is right now that there's one swing at Park 10 in 10th
Right.
grade, and you never get an opportunity to take Park 10 again.
Wow,
Right.
okay. So that's like, even with the HESPA, the kids had a chance to take it
There was a
again.
fall one, right. And we don't
Yeah.
know that they're not going to do that.
And
They just haven't said either
They haven't,
way.
but they
Yeah,
haven't said, I
and
guess
that's
it's
the one
down the
thing-
line a few years, so.
And that's the one thing that I would just, in the short time that I'm in this role of learning state stuff that I
Yeah.
never paid attention to as a teacher, I never even knew there was a state website. Honestly, it seems that it changes. So as I was leaving looking at this, I'm trying to say to myself, the next 2-3 years maybe is what's written down in concrete, and by the time that group gets there may be guidelines and
Yeah.
other.
I mean, I believe
alternatives.
this is the fifth
Yeah.
different release we've seen from the state with different options. So at this point, it's just, what we know today is this what the state says today, and next August, we might get an entirely different sheet, say, well, for this year's upcoming 9th graders, we're going to also have this other opportunity. So that's really all we know.
So you mentioned about the Ridge High Algebra 1 being a small cohort, and I was curious as to just how small, and if that was also affected by the poor Park testing participation rate, or if just like what small percentage on the math, the Algebra 1.
Right, so number of students? You're talking number of students?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
it's
ha-
not this slide, it's,
No, it's not on the slides. I don't have it in front of me, but it's generally around, I
no,
would say-
but this is the language arts slide, and we were talking about the math.
Right,
Yeah.
you're talking about the students that are, that 36%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have, I mean, I have those numbers, I can share those with the board at the next BOECC. I don't know that off the top of my head, but the number of kids that we have, it's somewhere around 20-25%, I think, that take algebra at Ridge. So we are, the vast majority of our students have taken the algebra course before they left.
Right, out of 100 eligible, we need to know how many showed up participate.
Yeah, that's what I was
Right.
wondering.
So is that 36% out of
Yeah.
50?
I could certainly find
50
that out
kids,
for you.
Which means
Yep.
we're talking about 18 kids, or are we talking about?
Yeah, that was the
Right.
question. Okay.
Well, and the interesting thing is, don't forget, if you look at the slide, the state is 41. So even if you took out all of our, you took out all of our 7th grade kids in algebra, take out all of our 8th grade kids in algebra, it's still a very close, it's a close thing with just that one group of kids against the entire state, which is, all the kids from all grades. That's the kids in middle school, the state, and everybody. So, when we look at our 80%, we pretty much doubled the state success rate on algebra.
Does the state look at our data like this, or do they look at our district's algebra performance, or do they look at it by grade level?
They look at, they look at it in, a myriad of ways. So there's not any one, we get the report in multiple different ways. They do it by course, as far as what we went for the report card that comes out in the winter. It's the performance report, the school performance report, that's done by course. So it does break out, each grade and each course. So I don't know that that's,
I mean, from their point of view, don't we just have a Berners Township Algebra 1 average score, regardless of which grade our children were when they took that course?
Yes, yeah. Well, as far as Park's concerned, Park doesn't really care when you're taking it. It's that you're taking Algebra 1. So they lump it all together. The state reports it out because obviously we're giving them the demographic data, so we can pull that data back out, which is what I did. But as far as the reporting that goes, yeah, you're getting an Algebra 1 score for the district.
So from the state's point of view, we're doing very, very well in Algebra 1.
Correct, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
overall.
not saying, they have the data. If they wanted to, they could start parsing it out. I just don't think they do
But that's
that.
not how they're evaluating us as a district.
No.
So I understand, besides not giving guidance about what Linda asked about, that they also haven't given guidance for what to do about students who may have moved here. Like, if you have to sit for all these tests, and then in order to meet the graduation requirement, a couple of years down the road we're talking, hypothetically, that what if someone came here and had taken algebra somewhere else in middle school and they didn't sit for the algebra? What if they came in the middle of high school from another state? They haven't issued guidance for any of the unique situations that could occur if someone hadn't sat for all these tests, right?
They have not, because what was different than the prior test is that if you are in the course, you take that test. So every test you take for Park is tied to where you're sitting on our roster and our actual, what they call SCED codes. So the codes we give the state for state reporting, that code ties you into a test. So if you name a course, algebra, whatever, that is an algebra course, you will sit for the algebra test, and that's your kind of one shot at it. I think there's all those questions of what do you do when you have these odd circumstances happen, and we haven't had to deal with those because, like Tara mentioned, all the ors. You had enough ors where you had some ways out of it, but eventually the state's going to have to figure out what do we do with this rising group of 8th graders if they're not successful, or you have kids who come in and they were from another state. We have plenty of those.
Yeah,
Another
yeah,
state or another
students,
state or
yeah.
another country. Do we have to put them all through portfolio? Because then that becomes expensive, right? We have to have staff sitting with them to go through a portfolio assessment, which is difficult. If the state says so, yes.
Are our special education students required to sit for Park as well?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, so they're going to have to figure out when students don't pass, there's got to be, okay.
Yep.
Are there board questions on that side of the room?
Here, I'll bring it up. Pass it.
Hand off.
It's more a comment than a question. I like the breakdown between schools, but a comparison to the state scores is totally meaningless. It means nothing to me, except you did better than the state, but that's not a feather in anybody's cap. What is interesting is Mount Prospect versus the other schools, and how do we bring the other schools up to Mount Prospect? And then the question I would really like to know is Mount Prospect competing with Melbourne or the Chathams? And I would hope that you could get that information from the other districts and give us some comparative scores, because this doesn't tell you whether we're doing well, whether we're doing poor. It does tell you that Mount Prospect's doing a lot better than the others, but it doesn't tell us against the better schools. I don't want to know about the state average. I want to know about the better schools in the state. So I would hope they would share that information with us. Maybe it might take a month or two to get it, but I'd like to know how we're doing against the best schools in the state.
Okay, I won't ask myself a question, so I can't just drop the mic. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Park was a mistake.
Still some superintendent's items.
I know, I'm just looking ahead. Because the Ridge PTO. That wasn't there, but I did see that, so that's, it's interesting. I was on That's perfect. It always used to be Tuesday.
Send out the timings of all the PCO meetings, or did I miss it or something?
I did it with
All right, we are up to the superintendent's report. Can I have a motion for items 1 through 3? Mrs. Wooldridge and Mrs. McEwen? Do you need to make any comments before we vote?
I don't think so.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin.
Could we just summarize what's in each one, the nurse's report and the,
You want to touch base on that? I'll talk about the bus evacuation drills. Sure.
Boy. I try that again. Okay, it works now. Yeah, sure. So I'll speak to the nurses services plan. Actually, we have one of our fine nurses here in the audience, Pat Miller from Ridge. So every year we are required to put together a nursing plan for the district. It speaks to the services that, thanks. Appreciate it, John. This is a live wire. There we go. Look. I can change a light bulb and connect a microphone. So it does speak to the nursing services that we offer by building. It speaks to the capabilities that the nurses have, the types of services that they can administer, supplies that we have, what we're able to administer to students services-wise. It is a public document. Every school district in New Jersey is required to submit it to the state. The nurses get together and put it together. It's all submitted as one document, but it reports out information by building. So it's not the most interesting information, very important, but it's an annual plan that we submit to the state.
strengths or weaknesses?
Not in that plan. That's not the type of plan.
It doesn't tell you anything about that, okay.
No, not a strengths or weaknesses plan, no. Not for nursing. We have a strong nursing program in the district. But no, that's not the plan that you reported out in.
School evacuation is the second one.
I'll talk about that.
I think I'll leave this in the holder.
Yeah, right?
So the school bus evacuation drills, we passed an updated board policy that was amended by statute, so we had to update our board policy on our school bus evacuation drills that added a little requirement to report out on your board agendas as to when each school was doing its bus evacuation drills, where they practice with a bus and have the students typically practice using the emergency exit in the back of the bus. So you should see that, I believe, twice from each school during the school year. So we should see 12 total reports by the end of the year.
And everything looked okay?
Yep.
Are there any other questions about the superintendent's report items that we're about to vote on? No? All right, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mrs. McCune,
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge,
Yes?
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Dr. Dunton,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Byrne,
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Madam President.
All right, we're up to item number 10. Now it's time for public comment on any of our agenda items. If you have anything to address the board about, please come in, sign in, state your name and address. Are there any public comments on agenda items? All right, I'm going to close public comment on agenda items, and we're going to move to committee reports. Starting with finance, do I have a motion for finance? Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yeah,
Is
I'd
there-
like to move items 1 through 8.
Is there a second? Mr. Fry? Mrs. Wooldridge, is there anything you want to address before?
Well, I have the Finance Committee met last week, so I wanted to go through a little summary of that meeting. Mr. McLaughlin provided a transportation update. He met with the Somerset County Ed Services transportation staff towards the end of September to discuss the bus routes. And he said that 55 applications for subscription busing were received in late August, and all of those students have now been assigned to a bus route. He's also been addressing all parent complaints regarding route consolidation. A handful of them still need to be addressed, and most of them are complaints about a change in the bus stop compared with previous years. The special engagement audit for 2015-16 that was agreed upon between our school district and Somerset County Ed Services is due on December 15th. And that audit will ascertain that transportation costs allocated to Berners Township for the last school year, 2015-16, are correct. The next item was the Oak Street School HVAC project update. Mr. McLaughlin reported that 13 firms have picked up bid packets so far, and 6 of those firms attended the pre-bid walkthrough on October 11th, and no major concerns or questions were raised during the walkthrough. The bid opening is scheduled for October 26th, and the project is still on track for Board of Education approval in November. And the Oak Street HVAC project is planned for summer of 2017. And then going through the agenda, I wanted to, we have several very generous PTO donations. We have the William Annan PTO is donating $17,224.40 for several items from the teachers' wish lists. The Cedar Hill PTO is donating $8,000 for basketball hoops and a Gaga pit, and the Ridge High School PTO is donating $1,670 for the replacement of the digital sign outside of the Ridge High School main entrance. And then we also have one professional development expense, number 7. And that's it.
Okay.
Are there any
questions?
Karen?
Linda, how many people did you say went through the walkthrough? I'm sorry.
6
at
firms.
Yes. 6?
6 firms.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. McKeon?
Just a comment. If my boys find out they're getting a Gaga pit at Cedar Hill, they're going to want one at Liberty Corner. That sounds fun.
Dr. Dunton?
What is a Gaga pit?
That was my question, too.
It's a game.
It's a game.
You've heard of Lady Gaga, right?
Yeah, well, it's
Oh,
actually.
let's not have that at the elementary
No, it's not
school.
that.
Lady Gaga.
No, it's basically an octagon-shaped ring, if you will, where there's a ball in the ring, and the kids play a game to try to keep the ball in the ring.
Yeah.
And bounce it out, bounce it in.
It's a physical education-related activity.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's like a special phys ed game.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Byrne?
I'll ask the same type of question. The node chairs at William Allen, what are they?
So the node chairs are sort of a newer model of chair that's designed to be very mobile on casters, and it's also designed to be able to get configured into pods very easily, so you can rearrange the desks for different purposes much more easily than the traditional desk.
Any other questions? All right, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Byrne,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Dr. Dunton,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge,
Yes?
Mrs. McCune,
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Madam President.
The generosity of our PTOs is just incredible and always, always appreciated. We're up to personnel next. May I have a motion for items number 1 through 23?
I'll make a motion.
Mrs. McEwen? May I have a second? Mrs. Wooldridge? Mrs. McEwen, do you have anything you would like to describe or report?
Well, we don't have a committee report because we have not met, but we're meeting this week on Friday. And I could take questions if anyone has any.
Are there any questions? All right, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mrs. McCune,
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge,
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Dr. Dunton,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Byrne,
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Madam President.
Okay, we are up to policy. Is there anything to report, Mr. Fry?
No, we have not met since last meeting.
Okay. What about curriculum?
Curriculum met this past Friday, and minutes will be
You
forthcoming
didn't want to
soon.
give up your weekend to write all the minutes?
I have the minutes, but there's something we need to discuss in board forum before we can proceed.
Fair
with
enough.
the new Google Docs
Okay.
approach.
Advocacy, Mrs.
Yeah.
Richmond?
Advocacy met on October 3rd, and we did a little recap with the PTO presidents about Ms. Swerner's and Ms. Woolridge's meetings with Senator Kane and Congressman Lance to talk about different legislative ideas that you guys wanted to talk to them relating to our district with school funding and bus drivers and busing. And then Nick followed up with talking more about the bus driver situation and the potential shortage that our district is going to be facing, and talked about how Somerset County Ed Services is working very closely with Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. McCarrion to just keep an eye on, and Mrs. Woolridge too, obviously, on the Ed Services end of it, to just keep an eye on what's going on with that. And I will say that I have noticed now, looking at the buses going through our district, that they do say drivers wanted and will train on them. So I know that they are trying to make waves and trying to address this shortage. A couple other things that were brought up from the PTO presidents that came up at their individual schools was Cedar Hill just made a note saying that some of the HVAC units in certain classrooms were not working, and Mr. McCarron took note of it and was going to check on it. Another PTO president mentioned that some of the contracts that need to go through the business office were being held up a little bit, and so they were just checking on a couple things there. Of note, on a positive note, the Google Classroom accounts for the second graders have been working, and everyone's really happy about that. It's always good to hear some good news. Oak Street was looking for the HVAC project bid, and we were happy to be able to give them that. And then there was just a quick question about looking at policy for homework and tests after holidays, and Mr. McCarron was going to look back at the homework policy and potentially discuss that down the road. questions?
Thank you. All right, now we're up to liaison reports. Do we have any liaison reports tonight? Okay. So item number 12 is public comment. Now is your opportunity to come and address the board on any issue that you may have. Once again, please don't forget to sign in, state your name and address. Are there any public comments? Going once? Twice? Okay, no public comments. All right, we're up to board forum, and I believe Mrs. Gray said she had something she wanted to bring up.
I do. So, as you know, we had a training session last week regarding the board's decision to use Google Docs for our primary means of communication for minutes and such. So it presents a little bit of a challenge, definitely for curriculum, because I need attachments by specific name in order to reference them appropriately in the agenda-based minutes. So I'm not sure how that communication is going to take place, but I thought if we needed to discuss it as a group, this was an opportunity to not delay the release of the minutes. I don't understand your. So, as you know, in the past, when you got the curriculum minutes, you got an attachment. Last time, Brian was kind enough, I don't know if he's still here, to put it in a zip file, which was wonderful. But I was able to know what each item was so that I could say, in agenda item 1, we discussed such and such, or that Dr. Heineman presented such and such, and see attachment titled ABC. So, with the Google Docs, I won't receive them, so I won't know what they are in advance of releasing the minutes to the group unless there's another means for doing that. So in order for anyone to make heads or tails without clicking and opening various Google Docs to try to make reference to the content of the minutes, we'll need some way to tie those together.
I noticed in the weekly packet, we had a bunch of Google Docs embedded in the message of the weekly packet. So maybe the way to do that is when it's communicated, the minutes are out, the attachments are embedded in the same message. But that being said, probably some kind of standardized naming scheme might also be really useful, like, BOE curriculum, and then the date, and then the name of the file, or Board of Ed advocacy, and the date, and then the name of the file.
Yeah, you've got the most.
Right, so,
Well, I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Just to finish the thought, the interesting part is, and I don't know who authors what Nick sends us, but all of the authors are different people. They're all supervisors from different departments. So there's got to be connectivity of some kind at some point, or there's got to be a central funnel, if you will.
Right. So we have a director of curriculum who is sitting here, who helps to facilitate the documents for the curriculum committee meeting. So I would think that when minutes are being prepared and there's documents that you want to include in the minutes, that we should be able to give you links or files that could be easily attached to the minutes, and we could kind of play around with the logistics of that. I think for October, what we were intending to do was set up some folders and just give the board members a chance to look at it, and in the meantime, we could just use the process that we've been using for minutes for October. So I don't want our working through the technical issues to slow down any board processes. So I would suggest that until we get the bugs worked out, we continue to do the procedures that we normally have. And then on the side, I'll work with you guys to show how I think we can get things like that to work. And as you run across questions like you have, good job. We'll figure out how we can work through those and make sure we give everybody some instructions about how to handle additional pieces that you want to work into the reports. Because we're all learning if we can try to do this more efficiently.
And I have another comment regarding our transition to the Google Mail platform. On 2 separate occasions, when important information was sent out to board members at bernardsboe.com, it never hit my inbox. So I want to give you a heads up, first of all, to be on the lookout. Like, I didn't get my weekly packet this week, so make sure you're all getting it. I've only noticed it happening twice because it was the 2 times where someone said, "Did you get such and such?" and I realized I didn't. The weird thing is, it's coming to me, it's just not hitting my inbox. So now we need to figure out where it's going. So
How do you know it's coming
Yeah,
to
how do you
you
know
if you
that?
can't
Because-
see it in your inbox?
when I knew the name of the email I didn't get, if I do a search,
You
it
found it.
finds it and pulls it up. But when I take away the search screen, I don't know where it is. So
It's automatically going to some folder.
yeah, so we're going to bring our technology director in to work on that one, but I'm just making you aware because you might be missing some emails too. So if, the bottom line is if you send something out that's really critical to one of the administrators or your colleagues and you don't hear back from them, you might just want to ping them and make sure they got it. Any other questions or comments regarding the Google platform transition?
Yes, as you know, I don't do email, so that's another question. Will the new format still provide me with the information I need? So,
I think you'll continue to get
We'll still get
photocopies.
paper. Yep,
good.
we'll still do paper. I think one of the things we could do is, even at the meeting, at a committee meeting, maybe do a little bit of work right there and then with whichever chair is trying to work on minutes. That way you're already at the board office and we could get maybe a little IT help right then and there to kind of train as we go kind of thing. Because it's hard to do remotely, calling on the phone. How do I get this piece attached? So I think we could all benefit from that. And Chris, our IT director, has been more than happy to give us his time, 10 or 15 minutes here or there to help make sure we're learning.
When all else fails, we can ask our students.
I was
too.
just going to say, our kids are very fluent in it.
They're much better at it than we are.
And I suspect a year from now, we're going to be really, really happy we did this transition. There's just a little bit of pain at the inception. Are there any other comments regarding the Google transition? All right, are there any other topics for board forum?
Well, just,
Mr. Byrne?
I did pass out the class length. It was 10 years old, so I'm not sure whether there's a more modern version. But we were the shortest class length 10 years ago, and I suspect we're still in that category. So that's something that I
Princeton
think
was
is
less
very
than us.
important,
Okay.
to lengthen the length of the classes.
Any other issues for board forum? Okay. Before I make a motion for adjournment, I just want to say we don't always get huge audiences at our meetings, but we do appreciate and respect the fact that many of you, both employees of the district and parents in the community and other members of the public, take the time to come out and get informed with what we're working on. So thank you for coming out and joining us when you can. And with that, may I have a motion for adjournment?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw, a second. Mrs. Wooldridge, we are adjourned.